One of the most common questions I received when it comes to writing is how do you deal with writer's block? Um, Especially back when I used to do a lot of book touring, aspiring writers would come up and ask that question, be like, when you get stuck, what do you do? And I often struggled to answer that question because it really is personal to each writer. For me, I think the easiest way to explain how to deal with it is a short story that I wrote years ago. It's called Trapped in Imagination. When I wrote this story, I was dealing with writer's block. So in the middle of a writing session, I just blanked. I couldn't think what I wanted to do next in the story. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So without a motivation, um, I couldn't proceed. I don't write a story unless it is capturing my imagination. So I started fooling around with a story, just writing off the top of my head about a writer, and I wrote it from the first person, so I felt like I was telling the story about myself. And as I wrote the story, I just delved into different aspects that caught my imagination. So I called the story Trapped in Imagination. And I started off with a writer who's sitting at his desk trying to write it all out, and he gets stuck and he thinks, well, okay, there's a mouse that runs across his desk. So he's like, well, what if that mouse is real and it has clothes on? And I kept building all these little story elements until I had this writer creating an entire world that he could envision himself in. But then he realizes when he stops that everything around him has become real. So the idea was that the writer's imagination could actually spark an entrance into another dimension of sorts, something where your imagination has dictated the parameters of a world that you can't understand. You can't understand the physics of it. You can't understand the inhabitants of it. Everything is just beyond your comprehension. It's the limits of the imagination. And we all know that the limits of the imagination are both scary and astounding at the same time. So I created this story. It was called Trapped in Imagination. And I was quite pleased with it. I later did a part two, but the first one was the best of the two. I was really pleased with how Trapped in Imagination worked out. It was a pretty straightforward storyline and almost a tragic sort of ending. But it was just fascinating to explore what would happen if I took that moment of writer's block and proved to myself that as long as I was writing something, I could kickstart my imagination and get everything rolling again with my other fantasy writings. I believe at the time I was working on, I believe I was writing Swords of the Six. And once I finished Trapped in Imagination, my mind was clear. I think my brain was just burnt out on a certain vein of thinking. And so by shifting into something completely different, I was able to restart, refresh, and the story in Swords of the Six continued to roll after that. So I highly recommend this method. It is excellent for breaking writer's block. So if you want to break writer's block, just start writing something, even if it's silly. You might not know where it's going, but that's part of the point. You shouldn't know where it's going. Explore your imagination, explore your creativity. Don't be afraid of where it's going. Just do anything that comes to mind, and then maybe it'll make you laugh, maybe it'll make you cry, but it'll free up your mind, it'll free up your creativity, and you will be able to break the writer's block. Currently, if you go to my website, authораppleton.com, I actually have produced the short story Trapped in Imagination. It's a longer short story than most, but I have produced it as an ebook. So if you go to authораppleton.com and you just click subscribe to my email list, then it will actually send you a free PDF download of Trapped in Imagination. I hope you enjoy.